Waste not the smallest thing, for grains of sand make mountains. Good morning and welcome to the heart of our beautiful city, Bridgetown, as we bring you a global celebration ceremony on this World Environment Day. It's a day for pledges and presentations as we continue to pledge our love and support for our environment. We celebrate the biggest day for positive environmental action. This year, Environment Day will focus on small islands and climate change. The official slogan for the year 2014 is "Raise your voice, not the sea level." World Environment Day is the United Nations' principal vehicle for encouraging worldwide awareness and action for the environment. Over the years, it has grown to be a broad, global platform for public outreach that is widely celebrated by stakeholders in over 100 countries. It also serves as the People's Day for doing something positive for the environment, galvanizing individual actions into a collective power that generates an exponential positive impact on the planet. In support of the UN designation of 2014 as the International Year of Small Island Developing States, or SIDS, World Environment Day this year will adopt SIDS in the broader context of climate change as its theme. Their objectives are to help build momentum towards the 3rd International Conference on SIDS in September and encourage a greater understanding of the importance of SIDS and of the urgency to help protect the islands in the face of growing risks and vulnerabilities, particularly as a result of climate change. They believe World Environment Day will be an excellent opportunity to raise a call for solidarity with the islands. Climate change is a major challenge for SIDS, as global warming is causing ocean levels to rise. Due to their small size and isolation, SIDS are more vulnerable to natural and environmental disasters, climate change and sea level rise. However, these islands have also been successful in overcoming their environmental problems. The problems that these small islands face: climate change, waste management, unsustainable consumption, degradation of natural resources, extreme natural disasters in the midst of overpopulation, and continuing industrialization are the problems that face us all. So how can you get involved? Simple. Going green is easier than you think. There are little things you can do every day to help reduce greenhouse gases and make a less harmful impact on the environment. In that spirit, pay attention to how you use water. The little things can make a big difference. Every time you turn off the water while you're brushing your teeth, you're doing something good. Have a leaky toilet? You might be wasting 200 gallons of water a day. Wash your clothes in cold water when you can. Leave your car at home sometimes. If you can stay off the road just 2 days a week, you will reduce greenhouse gas emissions by an average of 1,590 pounds per year. Combine your errands if you can. Hit the post office, supermarket, and do a little shopping on one trip. It will save you gas and time. Walk or ride your bike to work, school, or anywhere you can. You can reduce greenhouse gases while burning some calories and improving your health. If you can't walk or bike, use the bus or carpool. Every car not on the road makes a difference. Recycle. You can help reduce pollution just by putting that empty plastic bottle in a different bin. Compost. Think about how much trash you make every year. Reducing the amount of solid waste you produce in a year means taking up less space in landfills, so your tax dollars can work somewhere else. Plus, compost makes a great natural fertilizer. Composting is easier than you think. Remember, taking care of the earth is not just a responsibility, it's a privilege. Beautiful day here in Independence Square. No better place to choose to come to celebrate World Environment Day than right here in our beautiful city. As I told you, the heart of our city. And there's still bustling traffic all around. Of course, a lot of people who buy into all that World Environment Day is, what they will tell you is they really want people to leave their cars at home and come out on a day like this so that we can get to a place where we reduce the emissions in the air around us, certainly to make our air a whole lot cleaner. They've helped in that a lot of the dignitaries who are here today, they were parked outside of just on the outskirts of the city and shuttled into our arena here, the amphitheater as they call it, in Independence Square. We were just awaiting the arrival of Prime Minister, the Honorable Frando Stewart. We expect the main address from him this morning. Also, the Minister of the Environment and Drainage, Dr. the Honorable Dennis Lowe, he will be making a presentation. And we have executives from the United Nations Environmental Program who will be making special addresses on behalf of the UN General Secretary, Ban Ki-moon. That's all planned for here this morning. So if you're in the immediate area or you're going to be passing around, maybe your office building is here in Bridgetown, you should come on by and take in some of what's happening here in Independence Square. As we watch the dignitaries coming a little earlier this morning, they were arriving from just around 8 o'clock or so. I laid my eyes on Ralph Gonzalez and a few other dignitaries from down the islands. You would know that this year the focus is really on small island developing states, as the feature played just a few moments ago would have shared with you. What they really are doing is working along with, and by they I mean the United Nations Environmental Program and all the other programs that go along with it. They're really working along with small island developing states from all the way from Barbados to Samoa and everything in between, to help us get to a place where we're taking care of our environment. It's time now for the Ignatius Bayer Primary School and the National Anthem of Barbados.
You may be seated. The Right Honourable Frundell J. Stewart, Queen's Counsel, Member of Parliament, Prime Minister of Barbados. Dr. the Honourable Ralph Gonzalez, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and Chairman of the Caribbean Community, CARICOM. His Excellency, Mr. Akeem Steiner, Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Program and Under-Secretary General of the United Nations. Dr. the Honourable Dennis Lowe, MP, Minister of Environment and Drainage, Government of Barbados. His Excellency, Mr. Erwin LaRocque, Secretary General of the Caribbean Community. His Excellency, Mr. Stephen O'Malley, Regional Coordinator of the United Nations and Resident Representative of the United Nations Development Program. Her Excellency, Ms. Margarita Astralaga, Regional Director, UNEP Regional Office for Latin America and the Caribbean, members of Cabinet of Barbados, members of Parliament of Barbados, other senior staff of the United Nations, members of the Diplomatic Corps, permanent secretaries and senior Barbadian public servants, representatives of civil society, students and teachers, specially invited guests, members of the media, local and international, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm Donna King-Brathwaite, the Environmental Education Officer with the Ministry of Environment, Government of Barbados. It is my pleasure indeed to serve as your Master of Ceremonies for this historic global celebration of World Environment Day 2014, hosted by the government and people of this small island developing state, Barbados. We welcome all of you, not only those here present in Independence Square, in historic Bridgetown, the World Heritage Site that it is, but also you who are joining us from across the world via the media. On this World Environment Day, let us together raise our voices and not the sea level. Without any further ado, I wish to introduce to you the Minister of Environment and Drainage, Dr. the Honorable Dennis Lowe. Dr. the Honorable Dennis Lowe, MP, Minister of Environment and Drainage, continues to be an advocate for climate change adaptation for Barbados and other small island developing states around the region. He has, on many occasions, taken the lead in ensuring that Barbados's commitment to addressing the issues related to climate change is fully supported through meaningful and strategic partnerships between the Government of Barbados, the United Nations system, and our global partners. He is also an educator and believes that small island developing states must share their unique stories and aspirations with the world, with the view of keeping the SIDS agenda at the forefront of global development. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. the Honorable Dennis Lowe, Minister of Environment and Drainage, Government of Barbados.
Good morning, sir. Thank you very much, Master of Ceremonies. The Right Honorable Prime Minister of Barbados, Mr. Frundle Stewart, Dr. the Honorable Ralph Gonsalves, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Chairman of the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, His Excellency Mr. Hakeem Steiner, Under-Secretary General and Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Program, Her Excellency Margarita Astelaga, Regional Director, United Nations Environment Program, Office for Latin America and the Caribbean, His Excellency Ambassador Erwin LaRocque, Secretary General of CARICOM Secretariat, Ministers of Cabinet, members of the Senate, other members of Parliament, members of the Diplomatic Corps, heads of UN organizations based in Barbados and in the region, other representatives of private sector entities, senior public servants, specially invited guests, members of the local and international media, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning. We are gathered here today in Independence Square in the heart of our historic capital city, Bridgetown, to celebrate World Environment Day under the theme Small Island Developing States and Climate Change, and with the slogan, Raise Your Voice, Not the Sea Level. For our visitors, the city of Bridgetown is home of the Mecca of West Indies cricket, the Kensington Oval. And as such, I view my task this morning as one of opening the batting, if you will, for today's proceedings. I hope to do justice in the same vein as the prolific Barbadian and West Indies opening batsmen Gordon Greenidge and Desmond Haynes. I am sure that later in the proceedings, when the Right Honorable Prime Minister steps onto this wicket, he will perform with the same prolific splendor as our national hero and former West Indies great Sir Garfield Sobers. It is my privilege and duty to welcome this morning to the beautiful Barbados, our island in the sun, our gem of the Caribbean. For those who are joining us via the World Wide Web, we sincerely hope that you enjoy this morning's ceremony, and we look forward to welcoming you to the shores of our beautiful island in the near future. Historically, ladies and gentlemen, our natural environment has been the foundation for such great moments in history and for much of this country's economic and social progress. This can be seen from 19th century colonial times when agriculture was considered king and the landscape was blanketed with cane fields, to the 20th century when tourism began to emerge, rival, and eventually take over from sugar as the #1 economic driver of Barbados. Today, tourism is Barbados's main economic driver, although it is closely followed by financial services and the emerging renewable energy sector, which is poised to become a significant economic force in Barbados. But this very foundations, ladies and gentlemen, is being shaken by the impacts of climate change, and particularly sea level rise. Let me pause here to congratulate the United Nations Environment Programme for its choice of theme for this year, World Environment Day, and its choice of location for the staging of World Environment Day 2014, as Barbadians and members of the Organization of Caribbean Small Island States, we are proud to be part of this historic moment. The slogan, "Raise your voice, not the sea level," is quite apt to Barbados's circumstances, since we believe that if we do not raise our voices even higher, eventually we will be erased by the sea. Recent research shows that there is no doubt that climate change will have a considerable negative effect on our economy and national development agenda. I said before, we have to accept the reality of climate change and that it's here to stay. Therefore, we must continue to do our part in fighting the impacts of climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, given our circumstances, the most practical response will be to adapt. However, having said that, I am no way discounting the role we can play and have been playing in the area of mitigation. In keeping with the goals of successive development plans, including the National Sustainable Development Policy and the Barbados Growth and Development Strategy 2014 to 2020. Barbados remains committed to providing a comprehensive framework for the implementation of climate change-related policies, programs, and projects. The Ministry of Environment and Drainage, which I have the honor to lead, is the national focal point for the United Nations Climate Change Convention, the Kyoto Protocol, the Clean Development Mechanism, and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Consequently, we have the task of coordinating the national response to climate change. The key mechanism for the coordination of this response is the draft National Climate Change Policy, which was prepared by the National Climate Change Committee and has as its seminal goal to establish a national process for adapting to climate change effects and minimizing greenhouse gas emission over the short, medium, and long term, and to do this in a manner that is coordinated, consistent with the broader sustainable development aspirations and ambitions of Barbados. Under this umbrella, the government of Barbados continues to advance its projects and programs to address adaptation and mitigation measures. Given the theme of World Environment Day, ladies and gentlemen, there are two important climate change interventions undertaken by the government of Barbados, which I must note. One, the 2002 Coastal Infrastructure Project, which is now completed, and two, the 2011 Coastal Risk Assessment and Management Project, which are being hailed as international best practices for small island developing states. Ladies and gentlemen, those Inter-American Development Bank supported interventions are both under the Coastal Zone Management Unit of my ministry and seek to preserve and manage Barbados's coastline. Our coasts are critical economic assets and must be protected from risks associated with climate change. The most visible manifestation of those coastal interventions has been the two coastal boardwalks, the Richard Haynes Boardwalk on the South Coast, which was officially opened in 2012, and another one on the West Coast, which is currently being undertaken. The boardwalks were designed to function as climate-related coastal adaptation measures, but have reaped even more rewards as places for leisure, recreation, and community for locals and international visitors alike. Ladies and gentlemen, with these few words, my short innings has come to an end. Let me again, on the behalf of the government and people of Barbados, welcome you here and the world to this, our beautiful island, and to this World Environment Day ceremony, a first for Barbados, a first for small island developing states, and a first for the world to witness a small island developing state taking on the task of a developed country. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you His Excellency Stephen O'Malley. In August 2013, His Excellency Stephen O'Malley was appointed as United Nations Resident Coordinator and the United Nations Development Programme Resident Representative for Barbados, with multi-country coverage of 9 other small island developing states. Before this assignment, he worked with the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs in New York as Deputy Director of Coordination and Response Division. He has expressed his commitment to making his agency as relevant as possible to tackle the challenges faced by Barbados and other countries in the region. He has set as his principal objective during his tenure to ensure that UNDP's relevance is reflective of the agenda of governments around the region through addressing issues such as small island developing states and the post-2015 agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, to deliver remarks on behalf of the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Stephen O'Malley.
The Right Honourable Frundle Stewart, QC, MP, Prime Minister of Barbados. Dr. the Honourable Ralph Gonsalves, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and Chairman of the Caribbean Community, Ambassador Erwin Larocque, Secretary General of CARICOM, Minister of Environment and Drainage, Dr. the Honorable Dennis Lowe, MP, other members of the Cabinet of Barbados, Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Program, Dr. Achim Steiner, members of the Diplomatic Corps, members of the United Nations Sub-Regional Team for Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean, and other UN colleagues, permanent secretaries, other officials of the Government of Barbados, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the United Nations Sub-Regional Team for Barbados and the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, I'm very happy to be here on the auspicious occasion of the global celebration of World Environment Day 2014, hosted by this wonderful country of Barbados. I'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate the Government of Barbados for their stellar work in organizing today's events, as well as the entire week of activities surrounding World Environment Day 2014. The theme of World Environment Day 2014 is Raise Your Voices, Not the Sea Level, a theme directly relevant to small island developing states. These states, including Barbados and the OECS countries, are coping every day with the very real challenges posed by climate change and the corresponding problem of sea level rise. Today, we join with millions of people across the world to do something positive for the environment. I'm confident that the cumulative outcome of the World Environment Day 2014 activities will be increased international attention and specifically increased awareness of the situation of small island developing states. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my great honor to deliver the message of the United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon for World Environment Day 2014. World Environment Day 2014 falls during the International Year of Small Island Developing States, declared by the United Nations General Assembly to raise awareness of the special needs of this diverse coalition as part of the global discussion on how to best achieve a sustainable future for all. The world's small island developing nations, which are collectively home to more than 63 million people, are renowned as prized destinations, places of outstanding natural beauty, vibrant culture, and music appreciated around the globe. While small in total, the land size of the small island developing nations does not reflect their importance as stewards of nature's wealth on land and sea. They play an important role in protecting the oceans, and many are biodiversity hotspots, containing some of the richest reservoirs of plants and animals on the planet. Despite these assets, small island developing states face numerous challenges. For a significant number, their remoteness affects their ability to be part of the global supply chain, increases import costs, especially for energy, and limits their competitiveness in the tourist industry. Many are increasingly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, from devastating storms to the threat of sea level rise. Small island developing states have contributed little to climate change. Their combined total amount of greenhouse gases is less than 1% of total global emissions, but their position on the front lines has projected many to the fore in negotiations for a universal new legal climate agreement in 2015. Others are leaders in disaster preparedness and prevention, or are working to achieve climate neutrality through the use of renewable energy and other approaches. Small island nations share a common understanding that we need to set our planet on a sustainable path. This demands the engagement of all sectors of society in all countries. On World Environment Day, millions of individuals, community groups, and businesses from around the world take part in local projects, from cleanup campaigns to art exhibits to tree planting drives. This year, I urge everyone to think about the plight of small island developing states and to take inspiration from their efforts to address climate change, strengthen resilience, and work for a sustainable future. Raise your voice, not the sea level. Planet Earth is our shared interest. Let us join forces to protect it. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. O'Malley. It is my pleasure now to introduce to you the chairman of CARICOM. Dr. the Honorable Ralph Gonzalez is an outspoken Caribbean statesman, an attorney at law, and an economist. As Caribbean chairman, he is a proponent of Caribbean integration who holds strong views on the way forward for the Caribbean region. He believes that our regional leaders, in shaping our future in communion with other people and with our own people, must strive always to be forward-thinking and resilient. Despite our limiting burdens of yesterday, he believes that Caribbean people must face the immense possibilities with courage and take concrete action for the generations yet unborn. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to present to you Dr. the Honorable Ralph Gonzalez, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and Chairman of the CARICOM community, to deliver remarks on behalf of CARICOM.
Madam Chairperson, my dear friend, the Prime Minister of Barbados, my brother Frondel, my Lord, the Honorable Chief Justice, members of Cabinet and Parliament of Barbados, our very special guest here, Dr. Steiner of UNEP, CARICOM Secretary General, other distinguished regional and international public servants, members of the diplomatic corps. I see members of the clergy and my former pastor at Black Rock, Father Harcourt, the people of Barbados and the region, and a very special welcome to the children. The issue of climate change is the most significant existential issue for humanity. This is the question more than all others which determine how we live today and what our future would be. A Vincentian poet, now deceased, of some regional and international renown, Daniel Williams, wrote a poem many years ago called "We Are the Cenotaphs." He said, "We are all time. Only the future is ours to desecrate. The present is the past, and the past, our fathers' mischiefs." The issue of climate change and the impact on our living and our environment is not just a matter for the future. It is today. As we speak, as the fisher folk who dive for conch and lobster, they have to dive deeper. They have to do it because the oceans, our seas, are warmer. And the conch and the lobster want to go to cooler places. That is one example of an immediate challenge to livelihood. As the sea levels rise and we spend a lot of money on sea defenses and move our populations from low-lying areas and take them inland. We are, particularly in the mountainous countries of the Caribbean, confronted with repeated flash floods and landslides. So if the seas do not kill you or destroy your home at the seafront, the landslides would do it inland. And when the landslides do not do it, the entirely unseasonal weather makes it difficult for you to prepare for the rivers overflowing their banks and taking their homes, particularly of the poor and the vulnerable. This is not an academic matter. When I approach this issue of climate change and the environment, I realize, as His Excellency the Secretary General of the United Nations has just told us in the message, we in the small island developing states, we make very little contribution to greenhouse gases and the warming of the world, of the globe, of Mother Earth. But we are on the front line. Developed countries and most of the emerging economies do not want us to have a legally binding international agreement on the question of climate change. They would like to have an agreement with exhortations. They would like an agreement with general declaratory principles and with goals which are largely discretionary, and those which are not discretionary are so absurd as to make a mockery of the scientific findings of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. We in the small island developing states do not have the economic power to take on the developed countries and the emerging economies. But we have our voices to raise, and we are part of a world civilization. And we have to make links in practical ways with international bodies and with international non-governmental organizations and the peoples of those countries who are interested in seeing changes. This matter is one where the old-fashioned notions of sovereignty have to go by the board. Because what happens in the United States of America and Europe and China and India and Brazil, they affect us directly, and we have to speak about those things. We cannot hold a celebration with our heads in the sand. I didn't come from St. Vincent and the Grenadines to make a speech which was comforting. That is not my role. President Obama is very interested in moving the agenda forward in relation to climate change, and we applaud him. But we must acknowledge that in the United States of America, there are climate change deniers. And the Constitution of the United States says that when the executive signs an international agreement or treaty, it must be passed by a 2/3 of the Senate to be legally binding. All of us sitting here, including the representative of the United States, we know that in the immediate future, that is something which is very difficult. But this is a great cause. And great causes have never been won by doubtful men and women. And we have to continue to speak forthrightly and to build all the strategic alliances possible. In the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, just bear with me for a few moments to say to you the impact. I'll just take the last few years. At the end of October 2010, Hurricane Thomas affected us. The damage and loss amounted to in excess of 12% of our gross domestic product. By April of 2011, in the middle of the dry season, on the northeast of the island of St. Vincent, there were torrential rains and landslides, and rivers bursting their banks, causing havoc of almost biblical proportions. Then, in 2012, on Christmas Eve, a trough, a low level trough, two of them in fact merged. And in the space of 3 hours, delivered 12.5 inches of rain, causing loss and damage of 330 million Eastern Caribbean dollars, or 17% of the gross domestic product. 12 persons lost their lives, including a member of my own family. Over 3,000 persons were displaced, and over 11,000 persons directly affected. No, this is not theory. That's Christmas. We are in the middle of our recovery. But we now have a drought where in certain parts of the country we have to ration water, as in fact it's taking place all over the Caribbean. And in the first 6 months, 5 months of this year, when we will normally have 45 inches of rainfall, we have under 20. But at Christmas Eve, in 3 hours, we had 12.5 inches. And overnight, persons who are vulnerable became poor. And those who were poor became indigent in 3 hours. That is the reality of climate change and the irresponsibility of certain countries not to take this issue as the most serious existential question in this world. I read today 2 very inspiring messages, one by the distinguished Prime Minister of Barbados and one by Dr. Lowe. Read them in the newspaper this morning. And I want to adopt every single word and call them my own, and therefore I would not traverse the territory covered by them. I also want to adopt what had been said by Dr. Lowe this morning and by Mr. O'Malley. Because an old man in my village once told me, if two persons are of the same opinion, one is not necessary. So I will speak to other matters. We have addressed the issues of adaptation and mitigation. And we are doing a lot, and I don't want to particularize. Dr. Lowe addressed certain best practices in Barbados. I don't want to particularize all of what we are doing. But we need a lot of money to adapt and to mitigate. And the pledges of money from the international community continue to ring hollow because the pledges are not matched by the delivery of resources. Let us be honest about that. It is as though when you attend these international conferences, you get a lot of nice words, people make a lot of pledges, which they themselves do not intend to fulfill at the moment when they make them. It can't be that they will make pledges and then repeatedly don't live up to them for me to believe that they're serious about those pledges. Where do we get some money from? We get some money from the European Union, but they know that it is not enough. We get some money from the World Bank, and they know that it is not enough. There are smaller monies from other international organizations. The Global Environmental Fund, we get small resources out of the United Nations. The United Nations itself doesn't have much money. They have to twist the hands of countries that have money, but where they're important is in the area of getting the science right and do the advocacy. We can get some money from the IMF, but only after you have a storm, and you can get up to 120% of your special drawing rights, which for small, poor countries is a limited amount of money. And if you want more than that, say up to 300% of your special drawing rights, above the 120, you have to then have a program where they come inside of the Ministry of Finance and they run your government and run it in a manner not consistent with social equity or sustainable development or indeed environmental viability. So you're between a rock and a hard place. These are the facts of life. Now, Barbados has a very special place in the struggle for environmental sustainability and viability. The Barbados Plan of Action 20 years ago is the benchmark, and the Mauritius Strategy, which followed up. And on September the 1st to the 4th, we go to Samoa for the Small Island Developing States Conference, the third one, where this existential question would be at the heart of our deliberations. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the issue of energy efficiency and renewable energy is at the top of our agenda. %20 of our electricity is generated already by hydro. But the real game changer is geothermal. Depending on the estimates which you get, we have in the ground about between 150 and 300 megawatts of power. Geothermal is vital in the mix of renewables for us because it can provide up to 98% of the base load for electricity, as distinct from, say, solar, which would top your head about 40%, even though the technologies are improving. And we have a very active solar energy program. We have a partnership going forward on the exploration and the development of geothermal with a company which Barbados knows, Emera, which owns Barbados Light and Power, Reykjavik Geothermal out of Iceland, and the Clinton Climate Initiative. I do not believe that Emera and its subsidiary Barbados Light and Power is concerned only with providing the facilities, the investment for the development of geothermal for St. Vincent and the Grenadines alone. Barbados is 100 miles away from us, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines can in time provide geothermal energy to Barbados. The economics would have to be worked out, but there's a sense that it is doable. And that is where some of the partnerships which we have to build among ourselves. I want to congratulate Frondel and the government of Barbados for hosting this event. Barbados is a great nation, small but great. And amidst all the challenges which we face, we must never forget that there is a permanent idea of Barbados, which is elevating, which is stuffed with immense possibilities for the further upliftment of the people of this country, of the region, and of our hemisphere. This exercise may appear symbolic, but it is pregnant with great significance. As far as the children are concerned, we want to bequeath a better world for you. We don't want the apocalypse to come upon you by way of adverse impacts of climate change. I want you to take a great interest in it from your childhood. Use your laptops and your computers to get more information. Press your teachers. Educate them who are not yet educated on this question, because you can do it. Of all time, only the future is ours to desecrate. Thank you, and may Almighty God continue to bless us.
Thank you, Prime Minister Gonzalez, for your passionate delivery on the issues related to SIDS and climate change. And now remarks from the Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Programme. Before joining UNEP, Dr. Steiner served as the Director General of the International Union for Conservation of Nature from 2001 to 2006, and prior to that as Secretary General of the World Commission on Dams. His professional career has included assignments with governmental, non-governmental, and international organizations in different parts of the world, including India, Pakistan, Germany, and South Africa, among others. He worked both at grassroots level as well as at the highest levels of international policymaking to address the interface between environmental sustainability, social equity, and economic development. He serves on a number of international advisory boards, including the China Council for International Cooperation on the Environment and Development. Dr. Steiner is the recipient of a number of international awards and prizes, including the 2010 Leadership Award for Principled Pragmatism, the Tailberg Foundation, and Shark Guardian of the Year 2008, the Shark Project. In 2009, His Serene Highness Prince Albert of Monaco conferred upon Dr. Steiner the decoration of Officer of the Order of St. Charles. He is the 5th Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Programme's history. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Programme and the United Nations Under-Secretary General, His Excellency Dr. Achim Steiner.
Morning. Prime Minister of Barbados, the Right Honourable Frendel Stewart, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and Chairman of the Caribbean Community, Dr. the Honourable Ralph Gonzalez, Secretary General of CARICOM, Ambassador Irvin LaRocque, Minister of Environment and Drainage, Dr. the Honourable Dennis Lowe, and I have to say, Dennis, as a colleague and friend, you have beaten me today. I had a green tie, you have a green tie, a green shirt, and a green handkerchief, so you have outdone us all. To the members of the Cabinet of Barbados, to my colleague Steve O'Malley and the UN team also that has been so fantastic in supporting us in the preparations here, to the members of the Diplomatic Corps, to the permanent secretaries, officials of the Government of Barbados, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, and indeed also to our audience of young people, for whom, above all else, we organize every year the World Environment Day. As you just said, Prime Minister, and I was very struck by the quote you used, the present is already the past. We are here, Prime Minister, in Barbados because we want to honor, on the one hand, the pioneering leadership that Barbados, that you, your governments, and the people of Barbados have shown time and again. Pioneering because almost to the month, 20 years ago, it was here in Barbados that the voice of small island developing states was articulated as never before. And it is through the voices of leaders such as we are listening to this morning that I think the world does change the way it thinks about the future. And yes, the present, and this is the tragedy of climate change, is already the past. It is perhaps one of the cruel ironies that in understanding climate change and its impacts, we realize that we are the first generation that has both the choice, the power, and the responsibility to recognize that what it does today will change life on Earth for people for generations to come. We know that the science of climate change, contested as it may continue to be by some, is clear enough for us to accept that responsibility. Never in the tradition of humanity on this planet have we waited for absolute certainty before we take decisions. We are intelligent human beings. We manage risks. We assess both what we know and what we don't know, and then we make informed choices. Perhaps the tragedy in history books of the future will be that our generation knew so much more than any generation before it, had so much more information at its disposal, so many more choices that it could make, and yet we could already write today, perhaps, the history book of the year 2100, and it would be a history book in which we could today already say what would have happened and will happen if we don't change course over the next 80 to 90 years. We also are very proud to be here in Barbados because not only have you been a nation that has been pioneering in trying to bring the voice of small island developing states to the attention of the world, you continue to be a pioneer. We were very proud when Barbados invited us to be the world's environment capital for 5th of June, the World Environment Day of the United Nations, because over the last few years, once again, Barbados, with a community of other countries, has been leading the exploration of this notion of transitioning towards a green economy, trying to finally address this myth that has held us prisoner for so long, that economic opportunity and development, poverty eradication, employment and jobs, well-being are somehow always premised on the assumption that it must be at the expense of the environment. This myth of the 20th century has served some very well, but has ultimately cost many a great deal, and climate change is just one expression of that equation. I'm very proud to stand before you as the 5th Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Programme, because I stand in a very proud tradition of people who over 40 years have stood up and tried to go against this mythology. Development that does not take the social and environmental dimensions of sustainability into account is ultimately doomed to fail. And it is in the expression and the debate and the search around sustainable development and also the transition towards a green, inclusive economy that we are correcting this discourse. What we are able to say today with ever greater confidence is that it is in fact in protecting our natural resources, in looking at social equity, we actually guarantee that development in the future is possible. It is an understanding that environment is not something to simply be exploited, but to be used sustainably, to be conserved, and to be used wisely, that we enable future development to take place. Here in Barbados, you have done this for many years, and I'm struck again not only through the last few years when I personally have followed what you are doing, but also just opening the newspaper this morning, listening to the voices of people from different walks of life, and yesterday evening also to representatives of the private sector, that you have built a nation of very aware people, that you have a leadership in your government that has embraced the notion of being an island state that has so many challenges, but will not resign or surrender to those who say that your fate is only in one direction. We are here to celebrate Barbados today as an extraordinary island state, a small island state, but a very powerful voice, not only in the region, but also for the world at large. World Environment Day today brings the world audience right here into the historic city of Bridgetown, into the speeches and into the voices of people who have been at the forefront of trying to alert the world to what is happening. And let me tell you, when we were discussing the choice of theme for this year's World Environment Day, there were many debates. First of all, we wanted to take cognizance of the fact that this is the International Year of Small Island Developing States, that in a few months' time the world will meet in Western Samoa to once again try and bring the world's attention to the very specific challenges and also opportunities for working with small island developing states as a global community. It is also a year in which climate change, one way or another, will take a turn for the more hopeful path ahead, or get embroiled and stuck yet again, as you, Prime Minister, said, in these international negotiations that I think to many in the public domain are almost incomprehensible today. We also wanted to speak to the fact that when member states in 1972 created the United Nations Environment Programme, it was to be, and that is written into its mandate, an advocate for action. We are a United Nations entity that is not only here to document the science, and if you want the deterioration, and to be librarians of global destruction. Our role is in fact to advocate a different future, to advocate to leaders and responsible leaders in civil society and the private sector that what science is telling us is not a luxury that we can either take or leave, but that it is an obligation on which to exercise leadership. And therefore, also in choosing the slogan of "Raise Your Voices, Not the Sea Level," we wanted to address another issue. For many people, they don't live on a small island developing state. In fact, it is just 62 million people. But 62 million people in dozens of nations threatened with their very survival. Why should somebody in a landlocked country, somewhere in Asia, Europe, or Latin America, care about small island developing states? Well, Prime Minister, you alluded to it, and so did the Honourable Minister Dennis Lowe. The phenomenon of global warming, and it is just one example, is not something that is caused by the 62 million inhabitants of small island developing states, but it is the actions of every single human being every day in the decisions they take about what they consume, how they take their responsibility, that they actually determine the fate of people thousands of miles away. That is also why the slogan of this year's World Environment Day is about small island developing states, but it is also about the responsibility of everyone. It is about the principle of solidarity and accepting responsibility, because the environmental agenda of the 21st century is not only local anymore. These were the beginnings of people beginning to raise their voice 50, 100 years ago. Today, local actions have global consequences, and global impacts can change fundamentals in terms of local reality. That is why raising our voices and not the sea level speaks to every one of the over 7 billion citizens on this planet. Be they in the United States of America, be they in Africa, be they in China, be they in Europe, wherever they may live. World Environment Day is about the principle of solidarity, but it is also a day once a year when right now, all across the globe, literally tens of thousands of people are raising their voices. Actions are happening in over 190 countries today, in schools, in offices, in government offices, in communities, in local mayors' offices. It is actually extraordinary when we invite the world to raise their voice, how many do. And that is what fills me with hope. And that is also the second theme that I would like to address. As the Prime Minister said, when two people agree on many issues that are there, then there is one too many to speak. I will pass over many of the issues that I would normally have covered in my speech as to why the theme of climate change, small island developing states, is so important. You could not find a clearer and more articulate voice than the Prime Minister, who we have just listened to, in laying those out. So let me focus on the second part of that narrative, which is the opportunity. We know that small island developing states, but also peoples across the world, are immensely threatened by the impact of climate change. Many of the economies, whether it is in the fisheries, tourism, or even some of the basic sectors such as water supply, will face a world that is fundamentally different from what we have known for hundreds, sometimes thousands of years. These changes will be so disruptive to the point where in some places on this planet people will have to leave. They will no longer have a home. They will have to abandon their nations, their land, their ancestry. It is a difficult to conceive reality, but it is almost upon us, and we can document it every day. But let us also be clear that this is not a moment for passivity. And as the Secretary General, once again this year, is taking charge of trying to provide leadership to the international community, often at great expense to his own political capital, as many would argue, he is convening a leadership summit on climate change once again this September. Many have counseled him not to put himself forward to do this once more, as he has tried time and again over the last 7 years. But in his courage and in his willingness to once again say that the United Nations must accept the responsibility to bring nations together, we have one example of leadership. And that confidence that he draws in bringing the United Nations system to this function has a lot to do with things that are happening in countries across the world. The transition towards a green economy here in Barbados is not something that began only 1 or 2 years ago. Some of the seeds were sown, even if the terminology was different, years ago. The solar water heater program. What a great example, and what a fantastic contribution to showing that there is things we can do in every household if only we provide leadership and the right incentives. But it is also in the deeper and more fundamental shifts that we are trying to address, for instance, in terms of access to energy. It is one of the great ironies that we live in an age where access to energy and also the price of energy has become prohibitive for many people across the world. In fact, in a continent like Africa, to this day, 3/4 of the population has no access to electricity. What a bitter irony in the 21st century with so much technology and resources at our disposal. But let me tell you, while we are still listening to the pundits and the energy economists arguing about the price of energy in terms of kilowatt-hour cents, we are actually on the verge of achieving something that was inconceivable even 20 years ago. We are entering an age where we will look back upon the fossil fuel era of humanity as literally a nanosecond in the history of this planet. 200 to 300 years where we have become focused, some would even argue obsessed, about energy supplies in terms of burning fossil fuels to drive our economies and development. Renewable energy is not only a hypothetical option anymore. It is in fact knocking on the doors of economies across the world, and let me tell you, I would argue 20 to 30 years from now, we will be at the beginning of an era where an almost endless supply of energy will, for the first time in human history, be at our disposal. So why is it that so many countries and so many experts and so many economic policymakers are so shy about making that transition happen? Because it is an extraordinary opportunity. Because we don't have enough leadership. Because there are many who are doing very well with today's economy and actually profiting from a system that makes small island developing states sometimes have to pay 300% to 400% more for a kilowatt hour of electricity than a consumer in the United States today. How can you rationalize such a global economy? We know that in Barbados today and in many other countries, the revolution in terms of clean energy, renewable energy, and also the companion, the sister to this, resource and energy efficiency, are gaining momentum in an extraordinary fashion. The solar water heater program in Barbados has already saved you well over $100 million, I'm told, since it was introduced. And if Barbados were to be able to achieve its objective of moving towards 20–30% of renewable energy in the coming decade, it would make a significant difference to the balance of payments and indeed to every consumer on this island who has to bear the costs of this electricity bill. Let me tell you that in the year 2013, the world in fact invested over $240 billion into renewable energy infrastructure and investments in terms of new investments. And to the surprise of many, and still many do not know this, this is more than the combined total in oil, gas and coal put together. Now, who would have thought that was possible 10 years ago if you had listened to the energy economists and to those who argue that renewable energy is something for the next century or something for the rich? And Prime Minister, you spoke about geothermal energy. I live in a country where UNEP is headquartered, Kenya. Kenya is at the forefront of leading the revolution on renewable energy transition on the African continent and even beyond. It is in Kenya that today the total energy generating infrastructure will be doubled in the next 5 years, doubled from roughly 1,100 megawatts to over 3,000, by relying on geothermal development, adding over 800 megawatts of geothermal to the grid, by installing the largest wind power farm in the African continent of over 350 megawatts, and by pioneering today a pay-as-you-go solar energy infrastructure for the rural areas that are not connected to the grid, analogous to how you use a cell phone and your SIM card today to buy your 5 cents of electricity that you may be able to afford, but at least for 1 hour in the evenings, your family in your house will have electricity. Children will be able to study. Families will be able to spend time together as never before. This is the future of our economies, and it is not happening only in the rich countries. On the contrary, we can also look to China. China, yes, is today one of the major emitters of CO2 emissions. China itself is facing many challenges in terms of its environmental footprint. I serve on the China Council. I have accompanied China for well over a decade. But let me also tell you that it is in China that some of the most dramatic and revolutionary changes of course are now underway. The concept of an ecological civilization that has now been put at the center of China's thinking about its future development is not just a rhetorical formula. The massive expansion in renewable energy, the investments in energy efficiency are a signal that across our globe we are seeing developing countries and also some developed countries exercising leadership and responsibility, woefully often very late, but at least now with a sense of purpose that gives us all hope. As we meet here in Barbados today and we speak through the internet and through the live streaming and through the many, many reports and stories that have already been written about Barbados and the Caribbean and small island developing states, let me also say that in the United Nations Environment Programme, we are very proud and we are very frustrated at the same time with our ability of being able to work with the community of small island developing states. As I said to the Prime Minister last night, in some ways the United Nations Environment Programme is in itself a small island developing states in institutional terms. And perhaps that's why we have such a strong emotional affinity and also sense of solidarity with both the challenges but also the immense leadership that you are showing across the world. Today here in Bridgetown in Barbados, we will release a special contribution to the Summit and the International Year on Small Island Developing States, which is the SIDS Foresight Report, which we have produced with many of your leading experts, scientists and policymakers, that has outlined the 20 emerging issues that are at the center of the priorities of small island developing states. It is, yes, yet another report, but let me assure you, this is part of giving voice to both the reality, the leadership and the answers that so many of your citizens are in fact articulating today. And at the same time, this report will also accompany the release of the Barbados Green Economy Scoping Study, which is, interesting enough, almost falling behind the reality of implementation, which is not very often in the world. There are still reports being written and completed that we began together 2, 3, 4 years ago, parts of which you're already implementing while you're still completing the overall strategy, because the opportunities are so clear. And the leadership that you have been able to provide have inspired so many that things are beginning to happen even before a report is finally completed. What a wonderful symbolism in a world of far too many reports and too little action. Prime Minister, let me once again through you end my contribution to these World Environment Day celebrations here today in Bridgetown, Barbados, by saying also a big thank you to you and through you to all the leaders in the Caribbean, in CARICOM and the small island states community. In Rio Plus 20, the world, a couple of years ago, took a very important step. After 40 years of having established the United Nations Environment Programme, and let us be honest, for many countries born almost out of a sense of reluctance but necessity, it was you as heads of state and government who took the decision to upgrade and strengthen the United Nations Environment Programme. But even more importantly, you took a dramatic step, the first in over 40 years, of reforming the international environmental governance system. In a few weeks' time in Nairobi, Kenya, for the first time, all member states of the United Nations system will meet under the newly established United Nations Environment Assembly. Universal membership, every nation, one voice and one vote, and the ability to contribute to hopefully correcting what so often has been an afterthought in our international negotiations. Environment is not something separate to sustainable development. We believe very much in the integrated approach. We believe that progress in the economic sphere is conditioned upon social equity and environmental sustainability. In Nairobi, leaders from across the world will hopefully begin to give the environmental voice in the context of sustainable development a greater authority and legitimacy, so that many of the issues and many of the mistakes that we have committed in the name of development and even in the name of poverty eradication may become part of the history books of today and not again in 50 or 100 years' time. For that, I am deeply grateful on behalf of a global community of environmental leaders and scientists who have fought for many, many decades, often against all odds, and I can assure you also often at the ridicule and the dismissal of those who were the authorities at the time. Today, you, the leaders of the small island developing states, and you here in Barbados are no longer on the margins or the fringe. You are leading a global rethink of development, and lo and behold, not always do you have to be a big economy or a large nation to be heard. In that sense, to the world I say, please raise your voices, not the sea level. Look to Bridgetown, look to Barbados, look to its people, and look to the inspiration that through the leadership here and in so many other countries across the Caribbean and beyond, we are changing the way the future will be. And that is why perhaps the present is not simply the past today. That is our hope. Thank you so much and have a wonderful World Environment Day. Greetings to all our friends across the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency, for bringing greater focus to the global environmental reality and highlighting the positive contributions of SIDS and Barbados to the global development. At this time, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to introduce to you the featured speaker for this morning. And to deliver the feature address for this, the 42nd Global Celebration of World Environment Day 2014, is the insightful leader of our country. And it is indeed an honor for me to introduce him. The Honorable Frundell J. Stewart, QC MP, is a distinguished scholar, a legal luminary, and an astute politician. Our Prime Minister understands the importance of sustainable development for Barbados and for the Barbados that we want to see. Many of you would be aware that he was selected by Secretary General Ban Ki-moon as a member of the distinguished high-level panel on global sustainability, where he and other global leaders sought to formulate a new blueprint for sustainable future of a planet under increasing stress resulting from human activities. At the national level, he has been a champion for the development and implementation of a resource-efficient green economy for Barbados. At the regional level, he is very committed to the regional integration, and he is the chairman of the Caribbean Single Market and Economy. Ladies and gentlemen, we are guaranteed a thought-provoking and inspiring address, and so it is my pleasure to present to you the Right Honorable Frundell J. Stewart, Queen's Counsel, Member of Parliament, the Prime Minister of Barbados.
Madam Chairman, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and Chairman of the Conference of CARICOM Heads of Government, Dr. the Honorable Ralph Gonsalves, Lord Chief Justice of Barbados, the Honorable Sir Marston Gibson, members of the Cabinet of Barbados, members of Parliament of Barbados, Secretary General of CARICOM, Under-Secretary General and Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Program, United Nations Resident Coordinator for Barbados and the OECS, members of the Diplomatic Corps, other officials of the United Nations system, students of Barbados, fellow Barbadians, ladies and gentlemen. Today, World Environment Day 2014, is a day of understandable celebration. It is a day on which people of all creeds, races, and colors all over the world focus on and pay tribute to our planet, reflect on our acts of commission and our omissions, and pledge to doing much better in the future for the benefit of generations yet unborn. The annual World Environment Day celebrations first started in the year 1972, and today marks the 42nd year. The steadfast commitment of the world community, expressed in the dedication of global attention on the environment in this manner each year, reflects the importance which countries worldwide attached to this subject. From the dawn of human history, man has been trying to regularize his relationship with nature. An organic relationship has always existed between the two because man needs the environment and the environment needs man. The environment predates man, but from it and through it, man derives his sustenance. Man has learned to his enduring benefit that when he mistreats the environment, he puts at risk his own life chances. Invariably, nature hits back. Global warming, ozone depletion, sea level rise, and a miscellany of other responses are nature's answer to human callousness and indifference. This is the kind of context in which World Environment Day has to be analyzed and evaluated. This year's slogan for World Environment Day, "Raise Your Voice, Not the Sea Level," which permeates all of the various activities being held across the globe, fits hand and glove with the United Nations International Year of Small Island Developing States that is also being celebrated this year. The two areas of focus are directly linked in the theme Small Island Developing States and Climate Change. Barbados, a small island developing state in the Caribbean Sea, considers it a great honor and a privilege for its government and people to host the global celebration for World Environment Day 2014 under this slogan and theme. We do this today, June the 5th, 2014, here in Bridgetown, our capital city, set within the UNESCO World Heritage Site of historic Bridgetown and its garrison, and under the careful watch of our 375-year-old Parliament. We do this on behalf of the small island developing states of the Caribbean and all small island developing states everywhere. Here in Barbados, we chose to plan a full week of activities, starting with a church service on Sunday, June 1st, at the Cathedral of St. Michael and All Angels, to invoke God's blessings, and culminating in the ceremony this morning in Independence Square. The range of activities was strategically chosen to highlight some of the approaches and solutions adopted by Barbados to address environmental challenges shared in common with other small island developing states. As you are aware, this year, 2014, is a year of great significance for Barbados, other small island developing states, and small island developing states the world over. Just over 20 years ago, in 1994, the international community met at the Sherburne Conference Center, now the Lloyd Erskine Sandiford Conference Center, and agreed to the Barbados Program of Action for the Sustainable Development of Small Island Developing States, now familiarly referred to as the Barbados Program of Action, or the BPOA. Today, the Barbados Program of Action, with justification, is regarded as the framework for guiding the sustainable development of small island developing states, more commonly referred to as SIDS. That global policy instrument provides the platform for the Mauritius strategy for the further implementation of the BPOA, which emerged in 2005 from the International Conference for the Review of the BPOA held in Mauritius. The Barbados Program of Action also provides the basis for the anticipated outcome of the third International Conference on Small Island Developing States to be held later this year in Apia, Samoa, another important milestone for SIDS in September 2014. Now, I had the special honor of representing the voice of small island developing states on the United Nations Secretary General's Global Sustainability Panel, whose report entitled Resilient People, Resilient Planet, A Future Worth Choosing, was published in 2012, and which has contributed significantly to the discourse on the issue of sustainable development. The designation of 2014 as the International Year of SIDS marks the first time in the history of the United Nations that august body has designated a year of observance for a group of countries, in this case, small island developing countries, especially vulnerable by virtue of their condition as islands. This is a very important achievement for us SIDS, providing, as it does, the opportunity to focus on the successes and challenges which countries in this group have experienced in a quest to achieve sustainable development and in the face of the many inherent vulnerabilities confronting us. For our islands, the environment is a palpable reality affecting every aspect of our everyday experience. In fact, we find ourselves at a momentous crossroad as SIDS, since during the year in which we celebrate the International Year of SIDS, we will also be undertaking the 3rd International Meeting on Small Island Developing States. What is more, in this year, the international community is also engaged in discussion on a new development agenda, as well as the articulation of a set of sustainable development goals. We're also preparing for the first session of the United Nations Environment Assembly, which will take place in Nairobi, Kenya, later this month. This timing and happy confluence of events is what the dreamers may refer to as the aligning of stars. But as we are cautioned by William Shakespeare and Julius Caesar, men at some time are masters of their fates. The fault is not in our stars, but in ourselves. Given this harmonious coincidence of events, I know that you will allow me the luxury on World Environment Day of making a few pertinent observations on the SIDS preparation leading up to the Samoa Conference, which requires action, and I repeat, action, to be taken in the spirit of the various United Nations resolutions which call for the outcomes of that conference to be practical and pragmatic in support of the SIDS Sustainable Development Agenda. One of the fundamental principles underpinning both the Barbados Program of Action and the Mauritius Strategy for the further implementation of that program is inter- and intra-regional collaboration and cooperation across SIDS regions. To date, this remains one of the weakest aspects of the implementation of the SIDS agenda and is yet to be adequately addressed. In Barbados' view, a clear indication of doing justice to this important and fundamental concept must be establishment in each of the SIDS regions of a SIDS intergovernmental institutional mechanism to contribute to driving SIDS sustainable development. The experience over the past 20 years has taught us that without such a mechanism, progress will continue to be retarded. In a canny assessment of the human tendency to inaction, the poet Robert Frost once said, and I quote, "A person will sometimes devote all of his life to the development of one part of his body, the wishbone." SIDS simply do not have the luxury of wishing and waiting. The development of a SIDS intergovernmental institution must be one of the critical outputs of the 3rd International Conference on SIDS. Without such a mechanism, it is likely that most of the practical and pragmatic actions perceived by the various United Nations General Assembly resolutions will go unimplemented. Closely linked to this is the repeated call by SIDS worldwide for a coherent structural response on the part of the UN system to SIDS issues. On a day like this, I reiterate that such a response could contribute significantly to focusing the UN system on the needs of SIDS and would channel actions in a more efficient and systematic manner. Within the same context, at the SIDS Interregional Preparatory Meeting held here in August last year, I called for consideration to be given by the United Nations to the convening of a meeting of SIDS Ministers of Finance. The objective of such a meeting would be to address one of the most crippling issues being faced as a major constraint to the sustainable development of SIDS, that is debt. Its main purpose would be to frame SIDS specific practical and pragmatic actions in response to this issue as a fundamental input to the outcome of the Third International Conference on SIDS. I should like to repeat this call again today and request the Secretary General of the United Nations, along with the leadership of the Bretton Woods institutions, to explore the possibility of addressing this specific issue ahead of the Samoa Conference. To my fellow SIDS Prime Ministers and Presidents, I say today that we too need to take our own urgent and decisive action to strengthen our strategic coherence, particularly on issues at the international level. In a previous statement, I raised the issue of the need for a greater commitment on our part to SIDS collectivity. Simply put, as articulated in 2005 by the Prime Minister of Mauritius, we need to speak with one voice to ensure that our concerns are taken on board at international fora. Today, I want to take this opportunity to repeat the call for SIDS collectivity, and this brings me to the issue of the agenda for the upcoming United Nations Environment Assembly in Nairobi, Kenya, under the auspices of the United Nations Environment Program. Now, as you're all aware, Barbados and the Caribbean region have had a mutually productive relationship with the United Nations Environment Program over the past 30 years. We've signed many of the multilateral environmental agreements supported by UNEP, and we continue to collaborate on the environmental protection of the wider Caribbean Sea that facilitates the generation of significant economic activity for Caribbean SIDS. These are but a few of our ongoing collaborations in the broader context of the region's sustainable development pursuits. We congratulate UNEP, present here in the person of its Executive Director, Dr. Akim Steiner, and its hard-working staff for all that you have done to promote the cause of the environment and sustainable development everywhere. We know that there's a plethora of worthy subjects meriting consideration at the upcoming assembly. We are nonetheless concerned that SIDS issues do not feature as a substantive agenda item for the upcoming first historic session of the United Nations Environment Assembly. We are of the view that the fundamental requirements of the SIDS community need to be put on the UNEA agenda, and we call upon the Executive Director to give consideration to this matter with some urgency. Returning to the slogan for this year's World Environment Day 2014 celebrations, Raise Your Voice, Not the Sea Level, Barbados wishes to underscore the need for an early agreement on the various unresolved issues in the climate change negotiations, including support for undertaking urgent adaptation action on the ground in SIDS. Adequate financing, in particular the finalization of the architecture and operationalization of the Green Climate Fund, and conclusion of the discussion on loss and damage. The government of Barbados sincerely hopes that the next meeting of the Conference of Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which will be held in Latin America and the Caribbean, in Peru later this year, will be able to resolve many of these issues. Barbados stands ready to work closely with the government of Peru, as agreed by the Forum of Ministers of Environment for Latin America and the Caribbean, to make sure that this meeting of the Conference of Parties is a resounding success. Further, we will be joining our partners in the developed world in the upcoming United Nations Special Summit on Climate Change to be held on September 23, 2014. To all of our partners, let me communicate Barbados' desire that we should continue to work together to address the numerous issues associated with global climate change, thereby giving tangible meaning to raise your voice, not the sea level. Since for SIDS, these issues have the potential to affect our very survival, capitulation for us can never be an option. That revered Jamaican artist, the Honorable Robert Nesta Marley, was right when he said, when the race gets hard to run, it means you just can't take the pace. As you will appreciate, Jamaicans understand what it is and what it takes to finish a race. And given the imperatives of the climate change agenda, we can assure you that this region and SIDS in general are committed to running the race and that we are able to handle the pace. In closing, let me thank the United Nations and the United Nations Environment Program via its Executive Director for giving the voice for this year's World Environment Day to small island developing states, for selecting the most appropriate slogan and theme, and for selecting Barbados and the Caribbean as the host for this year's celebration. In honoring us, the Executive Director highlights Barbados' role as a guardian of the SIDS process and signals our continued commitment to serving as a hub for inter- and intra-regional initiatives that will no doubt emerge from the 3rd International Conference on Small Island Developing States. I take this opportunity also to highlight another significant event this year, that is, the 100th anniversary of the opening of the Panama Canal, one of the greatest engineering feats of the 20th century. Notably, Panama serves as the home for United Nations Environment Program's Regional Office for Latin America and the Caribbean. Many island people from Barbados and other Caribbean countries played an important role in the construction of the Panama Canal. In fact, over 15% of Barbados' male population left our shores at the turn of the last century to undertake the challenge of constructing the Panama Canal. It would be remiss of me if I did not take this opportunity to wish the government and people of Panama a happy 100th anniversary of that historic achievement. It is therefore an exquisite coincidence, if you will, that today Barbados is at center stage, hosting the global celebration of World Environment Day 2014, which has as its focus small island developing states and climate change. This allows us a golden opportunity to once again exemplify the unwavering commitment of the government and people of Barbados to the sustainable development of SIDS. May this day, World Environment Day 2014, celebrated in Barbados, an island state in the Caribbean, surrounded by the Caribbean Sea, be enshrined as the day on which the peoples and countries of the world joined hands in agreeing to raise their voices and not the sea level in order to guarantee the survival of small islands on this planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for your inspiring address. Your call to action on the SID's agenda is timely, and we will raise our voices on this action with alacrity. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the cultural presentation this morning. It is being put together for us by the National Cultural Foundation, and we wish to thank them sincerely for all of the efforts here. The staging of this event is because of that partnership between our ministry and the government, of course, and the National Cultural Foundation, who deserves a round of applause. We also wish to thank the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation for streaming this event live across the world, and also for allowing the rest of the nation to view this live event. The cultural presentation features performances by DJ Simmons, the Barbados Landship Association, vocalist Harclyde Grimes, Andre Ford on pan, Nick Whittle's poem interpreted by the National Cultural Foundation Dance Ensemble, prose by Winston Farrell, and music by the Ignatius Bayer Primary School. Particular works include some of the National Independence Festival of the Creative Arts entries that have won the Ministry of Environment Incentive Awards over recent years. The video clips from Islands on the Edge, Underwater Barbados, the Folkestone Marine Park, Whole Town Lagoon Project, and the Concept Bay Project reflect Barbados's place as the Caribbean Center for Sustainable Development since the Barbados Declaration in May 1994. I sincerely hope that you enjoy this presentation.
Something's changing in our weather. The cycle of the seasons seems less settled. Hot days are even hotter. Heavy rains fall at strange times, and storms have a new intensity. Many of us are so busy with our modern lives that we hardly notice these changes. But people who really study the weather, the farmers, the fishermen, the scientists, they know these changes are real. Many now believe we could be on the edge of a major transformation to the Earth's climate system that could dramatically change our lives and maybe affect our very survival.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is DJ Simmons. It's a great privilege to be here to help celebrate World Environment Day, a global celebration here in Barbados. And I do spoken word. And the slogan for this year is, raise your voices, not the sea level. So this is my opportunity to raise my voice. She crying. Tears raising the tide, the clean, clear complexion of her sandy beaches slowly being sucked away in eroding era. She's had many lovers, many partners, many liars, many who promised to care but only breathe hot air of emission, eliminating her energy, chipping away her character. We just used her, everybody, even me. And it took so long to see her beauty is slowly sinking. Memory stained with salt water, but I still remember. I remember those days of fun, frolic, and Birth Beach laughter. I remember entrepreneurs flourishing in every business venture. I remember farmers not having to worry about the source of water. I remember communities that could expand without the land dividing, demanding departure. I used to wear my shades in the heat thinking I was all cool. I would never listen to you, not listening to your whispers of others who broke your heart. What then God do with me? I asked. Or only my one can't do nothing? I said, but instead, now I hear. My vision has matured, and I see my family's future in the picture of your nature, Mother. I now hear you in my ear, asking me to turn off the light when I leave the room. I stride in pride as I walk down to the shop with the car parked cleanly at home. I even plant a tree. And I even turn